Hello, Brubs. We're back with Alraune by Heinz Ewers, a 1911 novel translated into English, German novel, I should say, translated into English by S. Guy Endore in 1929 by the John Day Company. And we shall turn off Satan for the reading, but to begin, we'll keep the heat on for a second. Chilly up here. Make sure this is a 15-page one. 298. Yeah, this is the short chapter. Satan, you got to go off. Chapter 14, wherein is described how Frank Braun played with fire and how Alraune awoke. That evening, Miss Ten Brinken did not appear at table. She had only a little tea and a few cakes brought up to her room by Frida Gontram. Frank Braun waited for a while, hoping that she would come down later. Finally, he went to the library, moodily picked up the legal documents, but he could not concentrate on them. So he put them away again and decided to take a trip to town. Before going, however, he took the other small mementos out of the drawer, the piece of silken rope, the little card with the clover and the bullet hole, and finally the mandrake root. He packed them all together, sealed the brown paper, and had the package taken up to Miss Ten Brinken. He did not write an explanation. She would find out everything herself in the leather-bound volume that bore her initials. Then he rang for the chauffeur and rode into the city, and he found Herr Menas just as he had expected, in a little tavern on the cathedral square. Stanislaus, shocked, was there with him. Frank sat down with them and began to talk of this, that, and the other, and finally became involved in a discussion concerning the suits against His Excellency's estate. They agreed to leave only a few very doubtful cases to the King's Council, who would reach a halfway acceptable settlement, but in other matters Menas felt certain that he could achieve a complete victory. In some of these cases, Frank Braun suggested quietly that a withdrawal and a recognition of the claims would be best, but Menas refused. Never acknowledge the justice of an opponent's demands, no matter how clear and justified they may be. He was the straightest and most honest attorney in the county courthouse, one who always told his clients the truth to their faces, one who might refrain from speaking before the bar, but would never tell a lie. And yet he was too much of a lawyer not to have an innate hatred of the recognition of a claim. It just makes the costs greater, Frank Braun objected. What's the difference, the lawyer barked. What will they amount to compared with the sums involved? And I tell you, one can never tell. There's always a possibility. A legal possibility, perhaps, Frank Braun answered, but he stopped. After all, it occurred to him, what other possibility could a lawyer be thinking of? The court handed down the decision, and that decision was justice, whatever it might be. Today they would rule thus, and a few months later a higher court would reverse the decision. Nevertheless, some court finally reached the decision that was sacred. Neither party, however, should come to such a decision. That was the job of the court, and for one or the other party to acknowledge the justice of his opponent's claim was to usurp the rights of the court and hand down a judgment without being a legally appointed judge. Menas, being a lawyer who was on one side or the other, and just as he wanted the judge to be completely neutral, so he wished to be entirely fair to the judge and leave the judging to him. Any other situation was an abomination to him. Frank Braun smiled. Just as you say, he agreed. He spoke to Stanislaus, shocked, asked for news concerning Dr. Monin and all the others who had studied at the university while he was there. Yes, Joseph Tyson had become a state counselor long ago, and Klinghoffer was now professor at Halle, and would no doubt be appointed to the new chair in anatomy, and Fritz Langen and that fellow Bastian, and Frank Braun listened, consulted at will this living Gotha of the university who knew everyone. Are you still enrolled? He asked. Stanislaus hung his head. He was a trifle offended, but the lawyer barked, "What? Don't you know? Why, he took his doctor's degree 5 years ago." 5 years ago? As long as that, Frank Braun made a rapid mental calculation. That must have been in his 45th, no, his 46th semester. "Well, well," he said. He rose and gave him his hand, which the latter shook heartily. "Then you must permit me to congratulate you, doctor. But tell me," he continued, "what are you going to do now?" Hello, bruvs. "He'd like to know himself," Attorney Manasse cried. Then Chaplain Schroeder appeared, and Frank Braun rose at once to greet him. "Back home again for a change," the black-frocked minister cried. "We must celebrate this occasion." "I'm host here," Stanislaus, shocked, declared. "He must drink to my doctorhood and to my new vicardom." The ecclesiastic laughed. "Let's share the honor, if you don't mind, Dr. Shocked." I'm reading Alraune by Heinz Ewers. They agreed, whereupon the white-haired vicar ordered Schwarzhofburger 93, of which the tavern had laid in a supply upon his recommendation. He tested the wine, noted with satisfaction, and clicked glasses with Frank Braun. "You're a lucky fellow," he said. "You can stick your nose in all the strange corners of the earth. The newspapers tell us all about your trips, but we poor creatures have got to sit at home and console ourselves with the fact that the Moselle still produces a good wine. I don't imagine you can get this label out there." "Thanks, bruv." "Oh, you can get the label anywhere," he answered, "but not the wine." "Well, tell me, your reverence, what else are you doing these days?" "What should I do?" the clergyman replied. "Nothing to do but get mad, seeing how our old Rhine is becoming more Prussian every day. So to relax, I write silly plays for the Tunis." Is that Tunis? The Bestivator, for the Shawl, and for Spumanus, and the Marizabil. I've plundered all of Plautus and Terence for Peter Malovich's. Easy for me to say. Malovich's Cologne puppet show, and now I'm doing Holberg. And just imagine, the fellow, he calls himself director these days, is now paying me royalties. Another one of those damned Prussian inventions. This book is supposedly a retelling of the Frankenstein story. "You ought to be glad," Attorney Manasse growled. "Besides," he said, turning to Frank Braun, "he has published a study on iamblichos. Iamblichos, that I assure you is an excellent volume. Not worth the trouble of talking about," the old vicar cried out. "Just a little essay." Stanislaus, shocked, interrupted him. "Nonsense," he said. "Your work is fundamental to the whole character of the Alexandrian school. Your hypotheses on the emanation doctrine of the Neoplatonists, Platonist? How do you say Plato? Plurals, Platonists? I don't know. And he went on, lecturing like an argumentative bishop from the pulpit. Here and there he had some objections to make. In his opinion, the author had no historical right to base himself so completely on the three cosmic principles, even though that might be the only way to fully grasp the spirit of Porphyry, and his followers. Manasse entered the discussion at this point, and finally the vicar, too, began to argue, and so they quarreled, all three, as though there were nothing more important in the wide, wide world than this strange Alexandrian monism, which, after all, was nothing else but a suicidal denial of the ego achieved by ecstasy, asceticism, and theurgy. I am on 14, I believe. Frank Braun listened silently. "This is my Germany," he thought. "This is my country." He recalled that a year ago he had sat in some bar room, either in Sydney or in Melbourne, and three men had been with him, one a judge of the Supreme Court, and the other a notable bishop, and the third a famous doctor, and they too disputed and fought no less zealously than these three sitting here, but the subject of their discussion was which one was the better boxer, Jimmy Walsh of Tasmania, or the slender Fred Costa of New South Wales. Not many. The book's only got like 50 pages left. But here sat an undergrown attorney at law who was still being passed over by the king's council. There sat a clergyman who wrote crazy playlets for the puppet stage. He had a number of degrees, it is true, but had never had a church. And there sat the eternal student, Stanislaus Schacht, who at the age of 40 had finally achieved his doctorate, and now didn't know what to do with it. And these three wretches were conversing about the most far-fetched philosophic subjects which had not the faintest connection with their professions, and they discussed these remote topics with the same ease and familiarity that characterized the conversation of the gentlemen in Melbourne, who were comparing the relative merits of two boxers. Oh, you might search all Australia and all America and 9/10 of Europe, and nowhere encounter knowledge in such profusion. I am 397,000 years old. Only it's dread, he sighed, and it's been buried so long that this exhumation spreads the odor of decay. These gentlemen, of course, don't seem to notice it. He asked the vicar concerning his foster son, the young Gontram. At once, Attorney Manasse interrupted himself. Yes, tell us, Reverend, that's one reason why I wanted to see you. What does he write? Vicar Schroeder unbuttoned his frock coat and drew a letter from his pocket. Here you are, he said. Read for yourself. It isn't very encouraging. And he handed the letter to Manasse. Frank Braun glanced quickly at the postmark. From Davos, he inquired. Then he, too, has fallen heir to his mother's illness. Unfortunately, the old clergyman sighed, and he was such a fine, clean lad, Joseph was. As a matter of fact, he was hardly meant for the ministry, and I, God knows, would have been only too glad to let him study whatever he pleased, although I wear the black coat myself, but I had promised it to his mother on her deathbed. Besides, he would ultimately have pursued his own tastes, just as I do. He passed his examinations for his doctor's degrees, summa cum laude. Let me tell you, the Archbishop, who is favorably disposed towards me, gave him complete dispensation upon my instance. He helped me greatly in my work on iamblichos. Yes, there are great possibilities in him. Only, he ceased and slowly emptied his glass. Did it come so suddenly, Reverend? Frank Braun asked. I suppose so, the clergyman answered. The first attack was the result of a deep emotional impression, the sudden death of his brother, Wulf. You should have seen Joseph out there at the cemetery. He did not leave my side for a moment, and while I gave my little sermon, he kept staring at an immense wreath of blood-red roses that lay on the coffin. He remained standing during all the ceremony, but just as it was ended, he complained of feeling weak. Shocked, and I almost had to carry him. In the carriage he seemed to improve, but at home he became listless again, and the only words I could get out of him were that he was now the last of the Gontram sons, and so his turn had come. And it seemed as though he were unable to shake off this apathetic condition. From that very hour he remained convinced that his days were numbered, although the specialist at first held out a great deal of hope. After that he went downhill rapidly. Almost every day one could note the increasing ravages of the disease, so we sent him to Davos as a last resort, but it looks as though the end were near now. Heavy tears clung to the corners of his eyes. His mother was tougher, the lawyer growled. She laughed at the old reaper for 6 years. God grant eternal peace to her soul, said the vicar, and filled the glasses. Let us drink a silent toast in memoriam. They raised their glasses and drained the precious wine. Now the old king's council will soon be alone, Dr. Schacht observed. Only his daughter seems to be quite healthy. I suppose she'll be the only one of his once numerous family to survive him. The lawyer muttered, Frida, you mean? No, I don't believe that. And why not? Frank Braun asked. Because, he began. Well, why shouldn't I tell you? He looked at Frank with mad rage as though but little restrained him from jumping at his throat. You want to know why Frida won't grow old, do you? Well, let me tell you why. Because she is now completely caught in the toils of that damned witch out there. That's why. Now you know. Witch, thought Frank Braun. He too calls her a witch, like Uncle Jacob in his leather-bound volume. Aloud he asked, Just what do you mean, attorney? And Manass barked, Just exactly what I said. Whoever gets too close to Miss Ten Brinken sticks there like a fly on molasses paper and can't ever escape. All his struggling and kicking won't do him any good. He's done for. Be careful, Braun. I'm warning you. It's a beastly ungrateful business, this warning. I've had my experience with Wolfchen, and now it seems it's your turn, so fly for your life while there's still time. What have you to do here anyhow? It looks as though you've been licking at the honey already. Frank Braun laughed, but it sounded a bit forced. Don't worry about me, attorney, he cried, but he didn't convince the other, and convinced himself still less. They sat there and drank. They toasted Schock's acquisition of the doctorate and the clergyman's promotion, and they drank also to the health and happiness of Karl Monin, of whom no one had heard a word since he had left the city. He's disappeared, said Stanislaus, shocked, and grew sentimental, and sang a number of melancholy songs. Frank Braun bade them good night, and walked back to Lendennick through the sweet-smelling spring, as he used to do many years ago. And let me have a drink of my mustache juice. I hate mustaches, but the glass is funny. As he crossed the court, he noticed the light in the library. He entered. Alraune was sitting on the divan. You here, little cousin, he greeted. Up so late? She didn't answer, but with her hand she motioned him to sit down. He took a chair opposite her and waited, but she did not speak, and he did not urge her. Finally, she said, I wish to speak to you. He nodded, but still she kept silent. Whereupon he began, Did you read the leather-bound volume? Yes, she said, and looked at him, breathing deeply. So I am nothing but a joke, which you once thought up, Frank Braun. A joke, he countered. An idea, if you like. Very well, then, an idea, she said. What's in a word? What is a joke but a funny idea? And I imagine it was funny enough. She laughed loudly, but it wasn't of that I wanted to speak to you. There's something else I wanted to know. Tell me, do you believe in it? Believe in what? He answered. Do you mean if I believe that Uncle has written in that book? Yes, I believe that. She shook her head impatiently. No, you don't understand. Of course this is true. Why should he lie? I want to know if you believe as that is, your uncle did, namely that I'm a different sort of creature, unlike other people. In short, that I am what my name implies. How shall I answer such a question? He asked. If you ask any physiologist, he'll surely tell you that you're as good as any other human being on this earth, even though your entry was a bit unusual. He will add that all these occurrences are purely accidental and unimportant. That doesn't mean a thing to me, she interrupted. Your uncle, on the contrary, considered those unimportant matters as of the very greatest importance. But their importance is, after all, a side issue. What I want you to tell me is, do you share his opinion? Do you too believe that I'm a peculiar creature? He did not answer. He was trying to decide what he ought to say. He did believe it, and yet he didn't. You see, he began at last. Go on, speak, she urged. Do you believe that I am your arrogant jest, which has assumed form? Do you believe that I who sit before you now am that thought of yours, smelted, brewed, and distilled in the old privy councillor's alchemical laboratory? He no longer hesitated. Yes, if you put it that way, then yes, I do believe it. She laughed gently. I thought so, and that is why I waited for you this evening, in order to disillusion you as soon as possible. You needn't be so proud of your thought, cousin, for neither you nor the privy councillor originated me. He did not grasp her meaning. Then who did? He asked. She put her hand underneath the cushions. This, here. She cried and threw the Alraune mannequin into the air, caught it deftly, and caressed it lovingly with trembling fingers. That? Why that? He asked. She retorted, did you ever think of it before that day when the two girls celebrated their first communion at King's Counsel Gontram's house? No, he answered, but I did not. But when this thing fell from the wall, then the thought came to you. Isn't that so? Yes, he confessed. That's the way it happened. Very well, she continued. You must agree, then, that the idea came from somewhere external to you. When Attorney Manasse delivered his profound lecture as though he were reading from an article in an encyclopedia and expounded to the assembly the meaning of this mandrake root, then the idea grew in your mind and waxed so mightily that you found the courage to suggest it to your uncle, and the strength of will to persuade him to carry it out, to create me. And if you're right, Frank Braun, and I am really just a thought, then you are nothing but a tool, an implement, even as were the privy councillor and his assistant, even as were. She stopped suddenly. Only for a second, then she continued, the prostitute Alma and the murderer, whom you coupled, all of you, and death. She laid the mannequin on the silken cushions and looked at it almost fondly. And she said, you are my father, you are my mother, you are the creator of my days. He looked at her. It may be so, he thought. Thoughts whirl in the air like the spores of flowers, and dance around until they finally fall into some man's mind. There they must dry up and die for the larger part. It is only rarely that they alight on suitably fertile soil. Perhaps she's right, he admitted to himself as he pondered over what she had said. My brain was always a good ground for the growing of all manner of strange and silly fantasies, and he seemed indifferent to the idea that instead of being the origin of Alraune, he was merely the fertile earth that had received the seed. But he said nothing, not wishing to interrupt her thoughts. As he gazed at her playing with the ugly mannequin, she reminded him of a child playing with a doll. She rose slowly, still grasping the root. There is something else, she said in a low voice. In order to thank you for giving me this volume and not burning it, I wanted to tell you. What? He urged as she hesitated. Shall I kiss you? She asked, avoiding his question. I can kiss. What did you want to say, Alraune? He insisted. She replied nothing, only I was thinking that afterwards I could kiss you. That is, after I had told you what I wanted to say, namely, go away from here. He bit his lips. Why? Because, well, it would be better. But that's not the point. Wait. Because, well, because it would be better, she answered, for you and perhaps for me too. But that's not the point. You see, I know everything now. I can see it all clearly now, and I imagine that things will happen just as they happened before. But I'm no longer blind, and so I suppose it's your turn now. Yes, that's why I say that it would be better if you went. Are you so sure of your influence? He asked, and she replied, am I not forced to be? He shrugged his shoulders. Perhaps, I can't say, but tell me, why do you wish to spare me? I like you, she said quietly. You have been good to me. He laughed. And the others, were they not also good to you? Yes, they were, she admitted. Everyone has been good to me, but I never sensed it. And then, they were all in love with me, but you don't love me, at least not yet. She went to the desk and took out a postcard, which she handed to him. Here is a card from your mother. It came this evening. By mistake, the servant brought it up with my mail. I read it. Your mother is ill and begs you to please come home. She too, you see. He took the card, but did not look at it. He stared into vacancy, undecided. He knew that both of them were right, that it was plain nonsense to stay any longer, and yet some boyish stubbornness cried out in him, no, no. Will you go? He forced himself to speak with a clear, determined voice. Yes, cousin. He looked at her sharply, watched every feature of her face, a mere twitch of her mouth, the slightest sigh from her lips, the faintest sign of sympathy would have sufficed. But her face remained quiet and serious, a frozen mask unstirred by a single breath. That vexed him. wounded him. It seemed to him an affront and an insult. He tightened his mouth. I won't be dismissed like that, he thought. I shan't go. She approached him and extended her hand. Good, she said. Good. Now I may go too. And now that we part, I shall kiss you if you like. A flame shot up in his eyes. Against his own volition, he said, Don't, Alraune. Don't do it. And unconsciously his voice imitated her cadence. She lifted her head and demanded quickly, Why not? He used her he used her very words purposely, so she surmised. I like you, he said. You've been good to me today. My mouth has kissed many warm red lips that thereafter grew pale and cold, and now I suppose it will be your turn, and that is why it would be better if you didn't kiss me. They stood facing each other, their eyes gleaming cold as steel. An imperceptible smile lingered on his lips. He was well armed. It was up to her to choose. Her no was his triumph and her defeat. And then he might depart with a light and carefree heart. Her yes meant war. And she sensed all this as clearly as he did. This would be a repetition of their skirmish on the night of his arrival. Only then it had been the beginning of the first bout, and there was the prospect of many other no-decision round to their duel. But now this was the end. It was he, however, who threw down the gauntlet. She picked it up. I'm not afraid, she said. He did not answer. The smile died on his lips. This was real now. I shall kiss you, she repeated. He said, Beware, I too shall kiss you. She returned his steady gaze. Yes, she said. Then she smiled. You must sit down. You're a bit too tall for me. No, he cried out loudly, not this way. He went over to the broad divan, laid himself down, and pillowed his head on the cushions. He closed his eyes and extended his arms. Now come to me, Alraune. She stepped up, kneeled down at his head, and hesitated for a while, looking at him. Then suddenly she threw herself upon him, seized his head, and pressed her lips to his. He did not embrace her. His arms remained extended, but his fingers curled into tight fists. He felt her mouth and the light nip of her sharp teeth. Kiss me, he whispered. Kiss me more. A red fog lay before his eyes. He heard the privy councillor's hateful laughter, saw the strange luminous eyes of Frau Gontram as she begged Manas to explain to her the meaning of the mandrake mannequin. He heard the giggling of the two communicants, Olga and Frida, and the cracked yet nevertheless still beautiful voice of Madame de Vere, singing Les Papillons. He saw the small lieutenant of the hussars listening greedily to the attorney's exposition, saw Karl Monin striving to clear the Alraune with a big napkin. Kiss me, he muttered, and Alma, her mother, red as a torch, with snow-white breasts through which meandered tiny blue veins, and the execution of her father, as Uncle Jacob had described it in the leather-bound volume, in the Duchess's own words, and that hour when the old man created her, and that other hour when his assistant brought her into the world. Kiss me, he moaned, kiss me. He drank her kisses, drank the hot blood of his lips torn by her teeth, and knowingly, willingly, he intoxicated himself, as he might do on champagne or on some of his oriental poisons. Stop, he cried suddenly, stop. You don't know what you're doing. But only wilder grew her kisses, and her curls fell closer about his forehead. Now the clear thoughts of day were shattered, and dreams grew rankly out of the rising tide of blood. The Maenads swung their Thursey, and the holy frenzy of Dionysus descended upon him. Kiss me, he shouted, but she left him. Her arms dropped to her sides. He opened his eyes and looked upon her. Kiss me, he repeated softly. Her eyes were dull. Her breath came and went. She shook her head slowly. Whereupon he jumped up. Then I shall kiss you, he shouted. He lifted her high in his arms and flung her struggling body on the divan, and he kneeled down. Is that divan, actually? Divan. And he kneeled down where she had kneeled before. Close your eyes, he whispered, and he bent over her. His kisses were good, kind and soft and caressing as the play of harps on summer eves, but wild too. Yes, raw and bitter as the storm wind blowing across the northern sea, now glowing like the fiery breath of Mount Etna, now tearing and consuming like the whirling maelstrom. She felt that she was sinking, sinking, slowly submerging in a twilit sea. Then suddenly the sea caught fire. The crackling flames rose to the sky. Torches flared, and the altar fires sprang ablaze. And into the sacred arcanum ran the bloody lipped wolf. She threw her arms about him and pressed him to her breast. I'm burning, she exulted. I'm burning. The brilliant sun was high up in the heaven when she awoke. She turned her head and saw him sitting up beside her. Are you going today? She asked. Do you want me to? He retorted. Stay here with me, she whispered. Stay with me. And that's the end of chapter 14. And there's Alraune. Alraune. All right. We're, 30, 40 pages from completion here? 40 pages or so. May be able to finish it today. That's all, bruvs. Let me drink from my mustache glass. I did want to see something first. Let me see this. What are we at? 31 minutes and 27 seconds. All right. There we go. Live. Alive, she cried. That's done. All right, Robs, that's all.